Nick, what were these journalists doing in the Central African Republic?
They'd flown in last Friday to do some investigative filmmaking into the presence in the Central African Republic of quite a large group of Russian mercenaries. They were investigating the activities of a group known as the Wagner Group, which is a private militia which has reportedly undertaken covert missions in Ukraine and Syria, apparently on behalf of the Russian government, although the Kremlin denies this. Alexander Rastogoyev is a very well-known, as you've said, a very well-known anti-Putin activist. His last film was shown in March on Arte and ZDF, the Franco-German channel. So viewers would have seen that in March. It was called Elect in Russia, and it was about the opposition. It was about the last presidential election in Russia when Alexander Navalny attempted to run. Ksenia Sobchak did run. She said she would stand down if Alexander Navalny was allowed to go onto the ballot. He wasn't. That film had one showing. It had a premiere in Moscow in mid-June at the Tretyakov Gallery Cinema. I was there to see it, and I met Rastogoyev there briefly. I've spoken to both the producers of that film today, a German producer and a Russian producer, who both understandably very upset by what's happened. Now, Rastogoyev and his team, the cameraman and the reporter, both well known in activist circles, were there to make a film on behalf of an investigative journalism unit which is backed by Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the exiled Russian oligarch who served a long stretch in prison himself before he was pardoned by Putin several years ago. So that's what they were doing there. They were travelling quite far from the capital of the Central African Republic. They were in the bush, and it's understood that late on Monday evening, their car was attacked. The driver survived and has reported that the three Russian men were all killed instantly, and apparently their cameras and cash and other belongings were stolen during that attack.
And Nick, briefly, if you could, why is there Russian involvement in the Central African Republic, a former French republic?
This is an example of Russia trying to gain influence and leverage in parts of the world where it hasn't historically had much influence. It was a French colony. Up until 2 years ago, there was a 3-year French military mission there. There's been fighting there for the last 5 years between separatist groups. Thousands have died, 500,000 have been displaced. There's currently a multinational UN force there who themselves are struggling to keep control and have been subject of allegations of sexual abuse against local women. The Russians are trying to get in. They cut a deal last October with the authorities there to supply weapons and ammunition so that local forces could be trained up under the guidance of the EU. There is still a UN weapons embargo in place, but the Russians have got around that by agreeing to register all the weapons and have the numbers listed so that if they go missing, they can be found and there's greater control. There are approximately 1,300 Russian military advisors there, apparently, and there are also about 150 of these mercenaries. So, I mean, clearly, the Russians cut the deal because they wanted to gain access to valuable minerals, valuable metals, very important for technological needs, and they want to compete with the Chinese in Africa. The Chinese are very active in Africa at the moment.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Nick Holdsworth.